Hello, everyone. This is going to be 13.3 Two Presidents Respond, and we're going to be looking at Hoover and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We're going to start with a quote from Roosevelt. This is Teddy Roosevelt's fifth cousin. He said, "I pledge to you, I pledge to myself, to a new deal for the American people." This was his acceptance speech when he decided to run for president in 1932. Our objectives: we're going to evaluate Herbert Hoover's approaches to resolving the Great Depression and how Americans reacted. We're going to contrast it with Roosevelt's approach. We're going to describe the programs that were part of the New Deal and their immediate impact on Americans' lives. And lastly, we are going to identify the New Deal's opponents and their criticisms. Part of this, we are going to be saving some of the big terms, the New Deal programs, for presentations you're going to be doing in class. Now, first, let's look at Herbert Hoover and the Depression. Hoover was not the cause of the Great Depression, but he did get a lot of the blame for it, especially because he had a bit of a tin ear when it came to dealing with it. He sort of told people they had to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and things like that. He tried to get through the Depression, but his approaches did not seem to work, especially because he was trying a very hands-off approach. He did not demand, but he asked companies to employ people at their wages and current conditions. They did not. He asked the rich to donate to charities. Some did, some did not. He asked the government to give money to corporations, but not to the people themselves, and that got him not many followers among the people. And none of this really seemed to be working. Hoover was asking, but not ordering. He was, trying to keep government out of business, basically, out of the business. And so businesses continued to cut wages, cut workers. Hoover thought that the Depression should be solved at the local level, not the federal level. Again, he comes from that sort of hands-off conservative Republican of the 1920s mindset where, the worst thing that a president can do is get involved in business because in their mindset, the presidents have been the worst people at handling business at that time. But unfortunately, this idea of localism didn't work. Most cities could not handle this problem at the local level. It was too big. He also refused to give money to individual people, only to corporations and businesses. Like I said, Hoover caught a lot of the blame for this, and so here we see people looking to get money, and they set up a little donation fund called Hoover's Poor Farm, hoovering over us at that time. People were more and more blaming Herbert Hoover for the Depression. You could see it in the term Hoovervilles for their homes and Hoover heaters for campfires instead of, a heater in the house. And with criticism growing like this, Hoover finally decided to get the government into the money doling out business, trying to get the federal government to fight the Depression. He created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, giving over $1 billion, again, to corporations, not to people. This is going to be the big difference between Hoover and Roosevelt. Hoover gave money to corporations. Roosevelt tried to give money to people. Now, the hope was that businesses would take the money and use that to hire more workers. Workers would buy more stuff, and eventually this money would sort of trickle down to the people. This is known as trickle-down economics. However, this didn't work in the long run. Most businesses, if Hoover gave them money, they were like, thanks, I'm going to hold on to this as hard as I can. The other thing he tried to do was he tried to create some public works. This is going to be something that we're going to see FDR do a lot of. He tried to do this with the Hoover Dam in Nevada. So here is the Hoover Dam, built by people who were out of work at that time. However, people are still very unhappy with Hoover. It looked like people were very worried, actually, that this might be the end of a capitalist society in America. Some critics were calling for socialism or communism, basically calling for an end to capitalism during this time. Meanwhile, other people were saying that, you know what, we need to go the other direction. We need a strong man up at the top. We need somebody, a strong leader, somebody who is fascist, perhaps. Fascism did have its supporters in America. And Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy were sort of the people that were being looked at for this. Meanwhile, veterans from the First World War marched on Washington looking for money that they had been promised. They'd given up really good jobs to go fight overseas, and so they had been promised bonuses, and so they were called the Bonus Army. They marched on Washington, and eventually, when they got there, Hoover put the military on them. He basically, they were beaten by soldiers. And so here's the Bonus Army marching to Washington, and here is the Bonus Army being attacked by police officers. Now, let's look at Teddy Franklin. There we go. Franklin Roosevelt being elected, as if it's not easy enough to get those two mixed up anyway. So, Hoover was almost guaranteed to lose in 1932, partially thanks to the Great Depression and taking a lot of the blame for it. So Hoover was running against Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a fifth cousin to Teddy Roosevelt, and Franklin was the governor of New York, just like Teddy was. Roosevelt was also from a very big New York family, the Roosevelts, and he married Eleanor Roosevelt, his fifth cousin. They didn't even have to remonogram their towels when they got married. So in the 1920s, also an interesting thing is that FDR was paralyzed after a bout of polio. However, he took great pains to look as if he wasn't. He wore leg braces so that his legs would be straight and that they wouldn't fall down. In the end, Roosevelt won big during this time period. So here's our 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, from the Hyde Park Roosevelts, not the Oyster Bay ones like Teddy. He was president from 1933 to 1945. Born in New York, he was the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, just like Teddy Roosevelt. He was also the former governor of New York, just like Teddy Roosevelt. He was also our longest serving president. He is the one who, after he served for that long, people decided that there needed to be presidential term limits, and that's where the amendment came from. And here's his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, alive from 1884 to 1962, also from New York. She was a first lady. She was an activist. She was also the first American delegate to the United Nations, too. Her father was also Teddy Roosevelt's brother, so Uncle Teddy, basically. When she was first lady, she gave weekly press conferences to female reporters. And since FDR couldn't travel very easily, his legs didn't work, remember, so she traveled for him. She met with people and she, rode in planes and she did all this sort of stuff. And this gave her a very enlightened view. She would actually call for things that FDR was not willing to go out on a limb on, like, hey, how about we give jobs to women? And how about we create a new deal for African Americans, too? So here is Franklin Roosevelt. Actually, I'm sorry, I need to get this. This is an important one to see. This is the only picture that I think we know of, one of very few at least, where Roosevelt is seen in his wheelchair. Like I said, this was kept hidden from the people for a long time. Roosevelt called for a new deal for the American people. That's what he called it. He was calling for a new deal. He never fully explained what this new deal was, and that was because he didn't want to restrict it. He wanted, basically this was a mad scientist going in a lab and saying, let's try everything to fix this depression. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. However, he did not want to give money to the corporations. His ideas were more to give money to the people, and we're going to see that when you do your presentations in class. So here are Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt on the way to the inauguration, Roosevelt looking a lot happier than Hoover. Now, Roosevelt also had a lot of smart people working for him, a group he called his Brain Trust. It included the first woman ever to get a cabinet position, named Frances Perkins, who was our Secretary of the Interior. Secretary of Labor, I believe. So, yeah, Secretary of Labor, not Interior. Sorry. Roosevelt also went on the radio trying to give people a little more hope and talk to them like they were normal, not talk to them like they were, well educated in finance and government, but like, let me talk to you as if I'm a regular guy and you're a regular guy. And so he called these radio addresses his fireside chats, trying to soothe the nerves of the country and get people to understand what he was doing. So here's Frances Perkins. She was born in Boston. She was alive from 1880 to 65. She was the Secretary of Labor. I was right, not the Secretary of the Interior. She was the first female cabinet member in American history and also was an investigator in the Triangle Factory fire in 1911. Francis Perkins once said, "Being a woman has only bothered me in climbing trees." And here's FDR giving a fireside chat during this time. Now, we're going to look at the New Deal programs in your homework, so I'm not going to list them here. And like I said, some of them worked, some of them didn't. He was willing to try everything, basically, and some worked better than others. Now, there were also a lot of critics of the New Deal on both sides. Conservatives did not like how much power this gave to the federal government. Uh, Liberals and socialists and communists said that this did not go far enough, that we should go way to the left. And so Roosevelt got fire from both the left and the right during this time. Other critics were populists, saying that they spoke for the poor in America. There was a guy named Charles Coughlin who was a Catholic priest who had a very popular radio show, and he used it. He started out as a supporter of Roosevelt, but he eventually started to go against him. He eventually became very loudly anti Semitic on his radio show and supported fascism. This eventually caused him to be silenced by the Catholic Church. Now, on the left, we had guys like Huey Long. Huey Long was a socialist, he was a populist, he was a senator and a governor of Louisiana, and he was calling for the redistribution of wealth. He said, let's take money from rich people and give it to poor people. Long believed that Roosevelt wasn't going far enough in fixing the New Deal, and he actually campaigned to be president by saying that he was going to give $5,000 to every man in America if he was elected president. But before he could be elected president or even run, really, he was shot and killed by the son-in-law of a person who was an enemy of his. So here's Father Charles Coughlin, who in 1939 said, "One thing is sure, democracy is doomed. This is our last election. It is fascism or communism. We are at the crossroads. I take the road to fascism." Yeah, that lost him his radio show right there. And Huey Long once said, "I used to get things done by saying please. Now I dynamite them out of my path."